Okay, the first thing you'll want to do is configure your volunteer settings. So you click on the volunteer configuration on the main menu there. And this is so that when you give a volunteer access to the system to log in, these values will be used as defaults. So the first thing we'll do is just choose the default date we want volunteers access to expire on. In this case, we're just going to say the 2016 election. Now we can choose some default permission levels. It's going to start off at level 1, which is very restricted, so you can change that. Just click modify permissions, and on the left here you'll see a list of some default or some preset options that you can select, and you'll see as you check those the detailed permissions on the right hand side indicate what you're granting them access to. In this case we'll just choose level 3. You can go through these details and click on and off any specific ones you want to give them access to, but volunteers usually will be pretty restricted. Now you can always go back in after a volunteer's been set up with access and change their permission specifically for them, but this just makes it real easy for giving volunteers access to the system. So once you make your selection, just click select and you'll see that indicated back on the main form. Now the system's going to email them their login credentials, but you have the option of inserting a custom message into that email that WebElect sends them. So in this case I'm just going to put in a little sample one here. You've got some formatting options up there at the top. You don't want to make this too long because they're just not going to read it, and it'll cloud up the information they really need, which is the login information. But once you put in your message here, you can click preview entire message, and this will show you what it's going to look like when they get their email. And so this is the custom message that you've inserted there. Everything else is generated by WebElect. Then you also have the ability to set up tags for tracking any voter records you look up or any contacts. So let's just create hopefully these are going to be, well, not hopefully, you'll start off with some default values here once we get that working. But you'll have a category called activities where you can put in different activities people may volunteer to do. But you can add any additional tags you want to. So one may be, we want to keep track of the people that say they'll participate in the Adopt a Voter program. So once you're happy with all your default volunteer settings here, just click Save. And now we can click back to the main menu. Okay, now we have the process of looking up people that have said they want to participate in the Adopt a Voter program. So we'll do that by searching for names here, and you can just type in part of their first name and part of their last name. Note the format change from the previous version. You now put the first name first and then the last name with no comma, and that's because when you're on a mobile device it makes it a lot easier to enter this than it does when you have to put in a comma. So just type in part of the name and click search. It'll come back with the search values. For this first volunteer, I'm going to use myself. So let's just click on my record right here. It's going to take you to the voter details page. So this is all the information on file with the supervisor of elections. So this is my active voter registration information. Now when we get closer to the election and absentee ballot information is being received, you'll see the absentee status show up down here in this box. At this point there's no active statewide elections going, so we're not loading any absentee data. Now I want to go over here to contact info because you cannot change any information on that voter info page. That is what's on file with the supervisors. But I do want to come over here and say, go ahead and complete my name that the supervisor does not have all of. Nickname, I go by Doug. And you can add any other information here. and my email address. And cell phone. And I don't have a home phone or anything. So once you put that in, you just click save. And now you can see I've got my cell phone up there, and all the information has changed here. Salutations changed to use my nickname. But now let's go over to volunteer, and this is all the information that pertains to a volunteer. So you can see for volunteers, we're mainly interested in getting their contact info, so that's available here. We've got any tags that we want to tag the person into. But I want to come over here to adopt a voter, and I want to activate it. So by doing that, the system's going to assign this volunteer a particular star color, and that's going to change between 8 different colors. And you'll see why, because now when I want to go assign when I want to go assign voters to this volunteer, I'll click assign by map. And now that opens up a map centered to this volunteer's address. And the yellow star indicates that volunteer. Now by default, it's only going to show addresses that we've specifically targeted. But in the case of the RECs, you're mainly just concerned with all Republicans. So we can click this elephant, and that's going to change the view from only showing targeted houses to showing any house that has a Republican, a registered Republican in it. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit because these markers are much more complex, so it takes a little while for them to draw sometimes. And now you can see the size of the marker. A small marker means there's only 1 voter there. A medium-sized marker means there's 2 voters there. And a large marker means there's 3 or more voters there. So this real quickly lets you visually decide which houses you want to target. Now in the case of adopt a voter, this will be a strategy that y'all will need to decide. For my case, I'm going to tag every house that has a Republican, but you may only be interested in going after the houses that have less than likely to vote Republicans in them so that you can push those out. Because any house that has a really dark red, that means that they're a strong voting Republican. So the way the colors work is dark red indicates that house has a strong history of voting Republican, or in the case of red. In the case of the other colors, blue is Democrats and green is non-Republican, non-Democrats. So the darker that color, the stronger the vote history is for that particular house. For the voters registered in that party. So this really light pink house that's a medium size, that means there's 2 voters, 2 registered Republicans that don't participate in primaries or generals. Now the kind of medium shade reds means that they participate in generals some of the time, whereas the dark red means that they participate in generals all the time. And I forgot to mention, right now this is showing the scores. The graph colors are based on the general election history only. So primary scores are not taken into account for generating these marker colors. We will have an option that lets you change these markers to indicate their primary voting scores for each house. But right now it defaults to only showing the general scores. So as you go through here, you'll just click on the houses that you want to assign to this volunteer for their adopt a voter. I'm going to go around. I'm just going to click every single one of these markers that's a Republican that's in this neighborhood. Now we will be adding a select by area tool like we do for the walk lists. But since you're kind of going to be deciding on a house by house basis which one you want to include, you'll probably want to continue just doing it where you click each house. So now I've got every house in this volunteers neighborhood, which is what they said they're willing to adopt. And that's it. So now I can close out of the map. Actually, before I do that, let me just go over a couple other tools here. So again, the target button will only show markers that have been targeted or that have been assigned to a voter, or a volunteer rather. So that's why these markers are still showing up, because they have been assigned. The elephant shows every address that has a Republican at it, and the house icon shows every single house that has any registered voter in it. So you can see when we do that, now we see a lot more markers that don't have any red in them. This gate icon will turn on Google Street View, and that's going to highlight every street that the Google car can get to. So if you notice down here, this street here I know is a gated community, and so that lets you kind of identify which communities are gated. And okay, so now that we've assigned voters to that volunteer, I'm going to close this screen. Okay, so I'll have to get that to refresh. But now you can see we've got 52 voters in 36 houses. So what that did was every single Republican in any of those houses that I clicked have been added to this volunteer's watch list. Well, and this volunteer is me. Now, the volunteer has not yet been linked to a user account. In this case, it sees that the email address I entered for this volunteer matches my email address that already has a user account. So it's just prompting me to link the volunteer to this user account. I'm going to show you in a second what happens when there is a new, when the user is not, or the volunteer is not already a user. So we'll close out of here. Okay, so let's go back. Now we're going to look up the next volunteer. Oops. And let's see, it's Sherry Sweeney. We're going to click on her. Again, we can review all the voter registration information, but we're just going to jump straight to volunteer. Put in their email address and any other info we have there. And I'll need to save that first, right? So I'm going to save that email address. Let's activate adopt a voter. It's assigned her purple. Signed by map. Oh, okay, so this is just one neighborhood over. So now we can see the yellow star, which if I hover over it shows what which volunteer that is. But we can see now her purple star has 0 assigned to it. Well, let's turn on the Republican voters markers. And now we can go down to her neighborhood. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to assign every single house that has a Republican in it. Again, your strategy may differ from that, and you may only want to mark the Republicans that are not likely to vote so you can push them out. Once we're done assigning, we can see we've assigned 14 houses. We just close this. And now we need to send her the login credentials. So you can see, since she does not already have a user account, it just gives us a button here that says, do you want to generate a user account for this volunteer and email them the login credentials. So we click that, saying yes, and now it's showing that she's linked to a user account called Sherry Sweeney. Now I'm going to bring up my email here, and here is that email. And here's our custom message that was inserted.